The History of Curb Your Enthusiasm, Season 1, Episode 6, The Wire. My thoughts on Jeff and Susie's thoughts coming up right after this. Hey everyone, I'm Yoel and welcome back to my YouTube channel. So grateful to have you. And in today's video, I'm going to continue with my series of videos on the video series by Jeffrey Garlin and Susie Essman on the history of Curb Your Enthusiasm. And today we're discussing Season 1, Episode 6, The Wire. And as I mentioned in earlier videos, I started watching the episodes again, and I have seen them multiple times, but I'm watching them yet again to be able to give more insights both on my reflections on the show itself, as well as my reflections on what Jeff and Susie have to share on their show. So I hope that adds to the experience, and always welcome to read your comments in the comment section below. And so let's jump right in. Now, in the beginning of their episode, Jeff and Susie discuss how many shows get canceled in their infancy before they really start to take off, or could have taken off before their creative juices really get flowing. And they mentioned that even Seinfeld, which is already well documented, was almost canceled. They didn't exactly get a vote of confidence. First, they got an order of 4 episodes, and then it was 13. And then finally in season 3, they started to take off. But can you imagine that Seinfeld almost got canceled? And I thought that was a really interesting lesson in life. A lot of times we tend to cancel things out, if you will, or we don't give things a chance. And oftentimes, had we given it a chance, it really could have blossomed beautifully, as is the case in Seinfeld. Thankfully, the producers and the executives did give it a chance. I think Rick Ludwin, of blessed memory, he's not alive anymore. He was a real champion of the show, and if not for him, Seinfeld may not have been what it became. So it's a good lesson for life to be able to sometimes really give something a chance if you're not sure about something, and or even if you think you're convinced that something's not going to be a go. Sometimes it just takes a little bit more of a push, or give something a little bit more time to ripen, and it could blossom into something really wonderful. So I thought that was an interesting point that Jeff and Susie made, and really is a nice slice of life and lesson to learn from. Now, something else I found interesting was that Jeff mentioned that they had filmed one of the shows, I think it was Amco, out of order. In other words, they filmed it and they thought it would be their episode 3, I think Jeff said, and they ended up pushing it back. And I didn't know that. I didn't know that they make those production changes after they've already shot an entire episode. It's really interesting for continuity. And Jeff mentioned that they did that in Curb Your Enthusiasm, and I wanted to underscore that what you see isn't always what you get, in the sense that just because you see a certain episode that comes in a certain order of the series, it doesn't mean it was necessarily shot in that order. I always knew that shows themselves aren't always shot in order, although I think Jeff said in an early episode that they do shoot Curb Your Enthusiasm in order, but many times shows and films and movies and whatnot are not shot in order. So the start maybe was shot last, and the middle scene could be that it was shot first, etc., etc. I didn't know that they would actually complete shooting on a certain episode and maybe move that off to a different time, a different scheduling slot, where the entire show itself would be scheduled later. So that was a revelation to me, and I'm grateful to Jeff for pointing that out. And Jeff, again, I've mentioned this in a couple of videos before, he's very self-conscious about a lot of the mistakes that transpired in the earlier episodes of Curb. And that makes sense. He's a producer on the show, so he's going to spot these things. But once again, I point out as a fan that these mistakes that Jeff sees are not things that are being seen by the audience necessarily. I certainly do not notice the mistakes that Jeff points out. That doesn't mean he shouldn't try and improve on the show as best as he can. And if he sees a mistake, he wants to improve on that. But it's interesting that he still talks about those mistakes today, even though the show was no worse for the wear. Now, into the show itself, it's very interesting. Larry needs to get permission to sign off on moving the wire that's very unsightly in their backyard that Cheryl wants to get moved. They need the neighbor's permission to sign off on that. And when Larry meets the lawyer and Jeff leaves that recording, and it turns out that Jeff in the show, that is, right, Jeffrey Green needs a lawyer, and Larry refers him. Larry says to him, "Hey, who knows? You may end up suing me one day." And sure enough, as the show continues, you see Larry getting into a fight with him, and they're having all sorts of wars of words going on. So Larry kind of says it as a joke at the time when he's referring this lawyer, played by Wayne Fetterman. He's referring the lawyer to Jeff, and says to him, "Oh, maybe you'll sue me one day." But as we know with Larry, a lot of times his relationships go sour, and in this case, it was no different, where he does end up getting into fights with this lawyer later on in the show. So I thought it was interesting that he started it off in a joking way, And it ends up being the case that he could have easily found himself embroiled in a lawsuit with this very lawyer that he referred to Jeff. And Larry's face was great. I always talk about Larry's facial expression. So much of Curb Your Enthusiasm, it's not in what Larry says necessarily, and not just Larry, the other characters too, but oftentimes with Larry, it's not necessarily what he says, but it's his facial expressions. And as he's getting shaken down by this lawyer, in the sense that the lawyer wants to meet Julia Louis-Dreyfus, Larry's face just starts changing. You can see how he realizes he's getting shaken down. Getting this lawyer and his wife to sign off on moving the wire underground is going to come at a price tag. And Larry's face is just priceless as his face turns from like friendly to like frown. And funny also, I was going to talk about this. I had this in my notes, and actually the Jeff and Susie on their podcast had Wayne Fetterman, who plays the lawyer, on their show, and he says how amazing it was to watch Larry's reaction when his wife, played in the show, I forgot the name of the actress, did an excellent job. She invites Larry over for a casserole dinner, and Larry's like, "No, I can't come for a casserole dinner," and she's just so aggravated and angry and dripping with sarcasm. And Wayne Fetterman points this out, how he really got a kick out of Larry's performance in that aggravation that he expressed on the show. And I had noted that down before. So I was grateful to see that not only did I pick up on it as a fan, Wayne Fetterman, one of the actors themselves in the show, picked up on this as well. And Larry also, after the lawyer says that he wants to meet Julia Louis-Dreyfus, and Larry is complaining about him to Cheryl, the guy's a prick and he's acting like a prick. And what does he think? He's just going to charm the socks out of Julia Louis-Dreyfus, and all of a sudden she's going to want to be his friend. And I thought that was funny because it's so true. Oftentimes, I think I don't want to speak for all of you out there, but I know for myself, sometimes we can have that fantasy of meeting that special person or celebrity, whatever the case may be, and thinking that we are really going to charm them and they're really going to like us. I think a part of that has to do with meeting celebrities, right? They have these luncheons with celebrities. It actually happens a lot in Curb Your Enthusiasm. One of the episodes, somebody pays a lot of money for a fundraiser to meet with Larry, and I'll talk about that in a later episode, I'm sure. But whatever the case is that a lot of people, I think, if they do get to meet these celebrities, they do have this kind of fantasy that they're going to charm the socks off these celebrities, and Larry really pokes fun at that in the episode. And also funny, as Larry's talking to Cheryl about the whole situation, he makes a comment about the sheer volume of pillows that are on the bed. He has to throw them off the bed every night. And I know for myself as well, back when I was married, my wife of yore had tons of pillows that were always on the bed. And I always wondered, like, why the hell are these pillows here? Like, what do we need them for? We're not using them to sleep on. It was for decoration. And that's something that I think a lot of men can relate to, when Larry was doing that rant about the pillows as well. And of course, Larry, back to the lawyer doing this shakedown, Larry, thinking that this lawyer will do him a favor without the shakedown, refers him to Jeff. And what Larry essentially is doing there is that he's foisting this lawyer onto Jeff, just so that he can get that favor from the lawyer to put the wire underground. And later on, we have an episode in a much later season. I don't remember if it was season 8 or 9. There's a whole episode about foisting. I know Jimmy Kimmel's in it. And this was kind of a foreboding to the future episode about foisting. It's interesting that Larry does not use the term foisting here, but at one point, Jeff is kind of complaining that Larry referred him to this lawyer, when really all Larry really wanted was to have this lawyer have a favor done for him, so that the lawyer would do a favor back for him. It's really the first instance of foisting, and Larry makes a whole show about foisting later on. And that in the later episode, it had to do with foisting a secretary onto somebody else. And as the lawyer's wife is recording Julia Louis-Dreyfus and Larry David on her camcorder, and it's amazing to see just how old the episode is that she's using a camcorder. Of course, today that would have been done on a cell phone, although as I record this video, I am doing it on an old-fashioned webcam from my laptop. Back then, this was done on a camcorder, and Larry does a whole routine about making fun of Jerry Seinfeld, and Jerry's a eunuch. And I don't know if Larry would have done that about every actor, but obviously because of his camaraderie and relationship with Jerry, he's able to kind of poke fun of Jerry on the episode, calling him a eunuch. And of course, it's in good humor. He doesn't mean it. It's his character calling him that. But it was just funny to see Larry referring to Jerry Seinfeld as a eunuch. Pretty comical. And something that was interesting to me as well, obviously, later on, Julia Louis-Dreyfus went on to star in Veep, and I think she uses a lot of profanity in that show, if I'm not mistaken. But of course, Seinfeld was clean cut. There was no profanity. And Elaine never used profanity. So here we have Julia Louis-Dreyfus as she's being recorded on the camcorder. She says, I have no fucking clue, or something like that. And it was a bit of a shock for me to watch Elaine, so to speak, cursing. This may have been the first episode of Julia Louis-Dreyfus cursing on cam. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe she has cursed in other roles that she's played in, but it was interesting for me to see Julia Louis-Dreyfus playing her real self, which of course we know is not necessarily or not at all her real self. I talked about in an earlier episode when actresses that Larry David brings on are playing themselves, but it's not really their true personality. But to hear her cursing was interesting to me. And of course, we have the continuity with the whole bracelet situation, and Julia Louis-Dreyfus likes the bracelet, and she thinks that Larry took it from her and then got it for his wife. And again, I was gratified to see that Susie Essman also talked about this idea of continuity. We have the bracelet that makes repeated cameos, if you will, in successive episodes of Curb Your Enthusiasm. And I thought it was interesting where Larry David was telling Cheryl he can't ask Julia Louis-Dreyfus to come again to visit the lawyer after the lawyer had stiffed her the first time and didn't show up for the meeting they had scheduled. And Cheryl says, just bring Julia Louis-Dreyfus back because I really want to get this wire underground. And the lawyer wants to meet her. He didn't meet her the first time. And Larry's like, well, that's his fault. Julia Louis-Dreyfus did me a favor. I can't ask her to do it again. And once again, I talk about this a lot. I think Larry's right. I think Cheryl was being selfish here. She's trying to get Larry to ask Julia Louis-Dreyfus not once, but twice to come back and meet with this lawyer when she already went out of her way to do it the first time. And Larry's arguing with Cheryl, and I actually think he was right. Where I don't think Larry is right, and where I think Larry is selfish, is when he's looking for his notepad, which he can't find, and he goes to Julia Louis-Dreyfus's home, and her husband makes a cameo on the show, appearing as her real-life husband on the show as well. And he's looking through their house late at night. They're sleeping. It's past the cutoff, as the episode talks about. And I thought that was selfish of Larry to start looking for that notebook at night just because he was in a frenzy because he couldn't find it. He could have waited till the next day, but Larry being Larry, he goes to try and find it that night. And also, funny enough, I was wondering if the notepad that featured in the show was Larry David's actual notepad. And Wayne Fetterman in the episode with Jeff and Susie actually says that it was his real notepad. It actually did look real to me when I saw it. It was kind of brown and bound, and it looked like the type of notebook that Larry David would use. So it was interesting to me that Wayne Fetterman said that indeed it was his real notebook and it wasn't just a prop. Also funny, and Susie talked about the fact that they were quoting Seinfeld a lot in the earlier episodes of Curb because it was following the success of Seinfeld until Curb kind of got its own legs and wasn't referencing Seinfeld as much, except for the reunion episodes, of course. But in general, here in the earlier episodes, they are talking about it. And when Julia gets upset that Larry goes to visit her house so late, afterwards, she's like, I'm going to tell Jerry. I can't believe Larry's doing this. I've got to call Jerry Seinfeld. She repeats it a few times. And when you think about it, it's kind of ridiculous. What is she, like a child? She's calling Jerry to complain about Larry. It's just so comical. Just any sort of way to reference Seinfeld. You see Larry putting that into the show. It really was not necessary and doesn't really make sense, but kind of comical. Julia's saying, oh, I'm going to call Jerry Seinfeld to complain about Larry, as if Jerry would really care anyway. And of course, Larry's back to apologizing to Julia Louis-Dreyfus, which is a theme we talk about all the time. Larry's constantly apologizing. And sure enough, even in this episode as well, Larry is once again apologizing to Julia Louis-Dreyfus. And then, of course, there's a whole debate where Julia Louis-Dreyfus does end up running into the lawyer. The lawyer actually walks in on them, and Julia Louis-Dreyfus gets upset at the lawyer for not making the first meeting and pretty much tells him to F off. And the lawyer is not happy at all. And Larry's like, well, that's a meeting. You met her. You wanted to meet her and you met her. And the lawyer's like, well, that doesn't count. This wasn't a meeting. This wasn't the way I envisioned at all. And this is also kind of a foreboding to one, or not a foreboding, this kind of a throwback to one of the Seinfeld episodes where Banya, if you remember, gave Jerry his Armani suit. And in exchange, he says, well, you can buy lunch. And Jerry buys him lunch. And Banya says, no, all I had was a soup. Or a soup and a sandwich. I don't remember exactly what the details were. There's a whole debate. Is that considered a lunch? Was that, does it count? And Jerry says it counts, and Banya says it doesn't count. And here too, Larry is arguing with the lawyer whether or not that meeting counts as a meeting. And the lawyer is saying, that's not the meeting I envisioned. It just reminded me of that Seinfeld episode. And of course, the lawyer does find Larry's notebook, and there's the $500 reward. And he has to pay up because the lawyer, of course, is not going to let him off the hook. And I thought it was interesting that Wayne Fetterman mentioned that the book actually really does have a $500 reward that Larry put in there for anybody who finds it. Although Jeff said now Larry puts his notes on his cell phone, and that's backed up. So that's good to hear for Larry's sake. Probably gives him some more tranquility. I'm also old school. I also use good old-fashioned handwritten notes, but it's interesting that Larry does do things on his cell phone. Of course, I use my cell phone a lot for notes as well. And also interesting was that when Wayne Fetterman's character says, it talks about the reward, and Larry says, yeah, why don't you use that to go buy yourself a new sweater? I just thought that was a great line. What I didn't like, and not to make it too serious, but when the lawyer's spelling out his name for the check that Larry's going to write him for the $500, he says it's Weinstock. I just thought it was a bit stereotypical, you know, Weinstock being a very Jewish sounding name. I didn't think that was necessary for the show or served any sort of purpose. And if it was up to me, they would have chosen a different name. I know I'm being nitpicky, and Larry David gets away with these kind of these indulgences, if you will, but just something I picked up on. And if it was up to me, he would have used a different name for the lawyer. And of course, we've got the ending to the show where they're both sitting there in the backyard and the wire is still there. And Cheryl is just fuming. You can see it on her face. She's doing a great job. Once again, it's not what's said, it's the facial expressions. And Larry, of course, has a look of indifference. He's just reading his paper nonchalantly, which is classic Larry. Just some other interesting tidbits before I sign off. It was interesting that Jeff said that Larry's actually a dog person. That was interesting to me. I would not have put Larry as a pet person at all. So it's interesting that Larry's a dog person. And also that he's a huge hockey fan. As a Canadian, it's nice to hear that Larry also is a hockey fan. Being Canadian, we've got it in our blood. I did know that Larry likes hockey. I think I had seen an interview of him on the Rich Eisen show, and he talks a lot about hockey and being an avid Rangers fan. But Jeff kind of underscoring that was interesting to hear, especially for me as a Canadian. Also funny that Jeff said at one point he told Larry that he's getting better in his acting, and Larry really took that as an insult. What do you mean getting better? I wasn't good from the start. And that's kind of mirroring the Larry David that he plays on the show. So it was funny to me that Jeff was trying to compliment Larry, and Larry took it as an insult in classical Larry David fashion. And finally, one nice note to end off on was that Susie was saying how Larry asked her to make fun of Jeff being a fat fuck, and she didn't want to do that. She doesn't like to make fun of people's physical traits, and she didn't want to make fun of Jeff's appearance, and Larry had to convince her that it's not her, it's her character. And I just feel that shows Susie's sensitivity. It's a real level of sensitivity that she doesn't like to make fun of people. Even if it's on the show and it's her character doing it, it's still left her with an uncomfortable feeling. And I've talked about Jeff's sensitivity in the past to the audience, and now this was a nice opportunity for me to underscore Susie's sensitivity. So kudos to you, Susie. That's really impressive. Okay, so that wraps up my thoughts on Jeff and Susie's thoughts, also my reflections on the show itself. I hope you found that entertaining, insightful. If you have anything to add, what do you think about this latest episode of Jeff and Susie? What did you pick up on? What did you pick up on from the show itself? Always interested to read your comments. And of course, if you would be so kind as to take a second just to hit that thumb up like button and subscribe to the channel. Our subscription, our amount of subscribers went up significantly in the last while, and I'm really grateful to all those who did subscribe. And if you haven't yet, I would be very grateful if you did. It definitely helps me out. It does help you out as well to not miss a future episode. As always, I'm grateful that you came to the video and watched it. And until next time, I look forward to seeing you at the next video. Hey everyone, hope you enjoyed that video. I've got plenty more in my videos library. If there's a topic you'd like me to discuss, feel free to leave that in the comments and I'll do my best to address it. If you can like the video, I'd be very grateful. As well, if you subscribed, you'd be helping me out. You'd also be helping yourself out to not miss a future video. Thanks so much. Have a great day.